5 unconventional types of tourism. Number 5, jihad tourism. When the Syrian war was in full gear, an Islamic State, aka ISIS, controlled considerable chunks of Iraq and Syria. Several Western nations faced a surge in citizens leaving to fight for Islamist groups like ISIS. These people are called jihadist tourists. Muslims, citizens who leave their nation to go get involved in a war that is none of their business. Most countries remain skeptical of the long-term consequence of having their citizens travel to other countries for jihad. There is the fear that some of these tourists will return home when the war is over or when they can no longer cope with its rigor, only to carry out domestic terrorist attacks. Number 4, slum terrorism. Slum terrorism is an adventure, reality, or poverty tourism. Refers to a form of tourism by people who only want to satisfy their curiosity. Slum terrorists will visit the congested, poverty-hidden slums of a country just to see what they look like. Popular destinations include Manila in the Philippines, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and Mumbai in India. Interestingly, slum terrorists used to be popular in the USA during the 19th century. Rich and curious Londoners would travel to see an entire industry sprang up around the slum tourist area with tour operation, hiring actors to pose as drug users and gang members. Some actors took their part further by engaging in a staged shootout right out the streets just to satisfy ignorant tourists. Suicidal tourism. Assisted tourism or suicidal tourism is the act of helping someone commit suicide. It's legal in some countries but not in Switzerland. Today, Switzerland is seeing a new kind of visitor, suicide tourists. Suicide tourists are people who travel from their countries to access assisted suicide services in Switzerland. Experimental tourism. Experimental tourism is a catch-all phrase for a act of trying something new. There is no hard or fast rule on what qualifies as experimental tourism, as any unusual form of excursion counts. You do not need to leave your hometown to become an experimental tourist. If you decide to leave your hometown, a trip to the government office in a nearby city qualifies as experimental tourism. Disaster tourism. Disaster tourists are people who travel to areas that have been destroyed by natural or man-made disaster. This form of tourism is alternatively called dark tourism. The tourists are only interested in satisfying their curiosity and seeing firsthand the effects of these disasters. Sex tourism. As should already be obvious from its name, sex tourism are those who travel to another country for sex. Most of the time, the tourists will be traveling from a developed nation to a less developed one. It used to be exclusive province of West tourists, but more sex tourists are now coming from China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. Gun tourism. Unlike the United States, not every country allows citizens to own assault and sniper rifles. In some nations, getting a pistol is almost impossible. Some citizens of Australia and countries in Asia and Europe can wish to lay their itchy fingers on firearms will travel to the US to scratch their itch. Not every gun terrorist comes to the US as a gun terrorist. Some are regular travelers who become terrorists the moment they decide to satisfy their curiosity at shooting range. Other Americans who cannot afford to buy guns or are curious about shooting are particularly type of gun, Hawaii and Lagos are popular gun tourist destinations.